Now that 2024 is behind us, I thought it could be interesting to take a look at the big major moves that we've seen on the Linux and open source front over the past year, because there was a lot of stuff happening and a lot of things changed, mostly for the better. I also think 2025 will see those trends continue and the Linux and open source ecosystem get even better, with one notable exception. So let's talk about this, and let's talk about our sponsor. This video is sponsored by TuxCare. They are your all-in-one provider of solutions for securing and automating your server and workstation fleet on Linux. They offer extended lifecycle support for end-of-life distros, development frameworks, and languages, but they also have a fantastic rebootless live patching solution that lets you apply fixes to your kernels, shared libraries, and virtual machines without rebooting at all. And if you're wondering why that would be important, well, TuxCare gives you access to a free downloadable guide to explain that. It's called How the Modern Sysadmin Does Patching, and it will explain why the current conventional solution to patch Linux systems is a headache, with maintenance windows to plan around, with stress and downtime, and it will also explain how rebootless patching can be automated, used to patch multiple distros and minimize downtime and patching related hours, so you can focus on the tasks that create the most value. So click the link in the description to download the guide. You don't even need to submit any email address or personal info, so check it out. So our first main big thing will be about the Linux desktop as a whole. Linux started the year at under 4%, 3.77%, and over the course of 2024, it fluctuated, but it really cemented its position at around 4%, including finishing the entire year at 4.13 after it reached a maximum a little bit earlier in the year. This market share looks like it is here to stay. The Steam Deck definitely helped, but it's not just the Steam Deck. It couldn't be, because SteamOS only represents 2% of the gaming market share, so something is pushing Linux much, much higher than just the Steam Deck. And it looks like it might be India. In the Indian market, Linux represents 13.15% of the desktop market share, and it just lowered at the end of 2024, but it used to be even a little bit higher. Now, don't get me wrong, a 4.1% market share for the desktop operating system market is still very, very low, but it's not insignificant. It is not small. It is a huge number of users that can be targeted by game developers, software developers, and anybody who has anything to sell, basically, meaning our platform can start being targeted by interesting stuff, but also by less interesting stuff like more malware geared towards the desktop. Now, we also have some good opportunities coming in 2025, notably Windows 11. This is a reviled operating system by a lot of people. They see the death of Windows 10, the last known solid version of Windows. They see the brute forcing of AI features, of Copilot, and even actual spyware in the form of recall as horrible things being forced onto them and that they don't want. Windows has also become completely unreliable. Every single update that Microsoft pushes makes headlines for how many systems it had broken and how many features are now not working properly. Windows is a mess. It is not tested enough. It is focusing on everything that people don't want to see, and this is the biggest opportunity for Linux, as always. Now, the second major thing that happened in 2024 is funding for a lot of our projects, and this went through one specific organism called the Sovereign Tech Fund. They are not the only ones who funded major open source projects. We've seen Valve invest a lot in contributions in terms of the Mesa drivers, but also in other parts of the Linux ecosystem like Arch. But really, the Sovereign Tech Foundation did a lot of the work here. They are a German organization. They're funded by the German Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action. I think their budget for 2024 was 13 million euros, and their goal is to secure and promote open source technology so the entire open source ecosystem is more resilient against attacks. It's basically one of these digital sovereignty and software independence sort of programs that Germany is pushing and that we're seeing all across Europe, although only the German one seems to really invest that money into well-known open source projects. Other countries talk a lot about digital sovereignty, but they don't necessarily do much to try and achieve it. As a bunch of examples, the Sovereign Tech Fund gave 1 million euros to the GNOME project for some GNOME-specific stuff like variable refresh rate, but also a lot of cross-desktop stuff. We've seen FreeBSD get 686,000 euros. We've seen Arch Linux get about 560,000 euros to work on their package management and infrastructure. OpenStreetMaps got 384,000 euros to improve their infrastructure, their code quality, their documentation, and a lot of other projects also got some money like PHP, Samba, FFmpeg, systemd, and a lot more. And this all points to Germany maybe trying to build a better software ecosystem that they would rely upon. And hopefully, with pressure from citizens, and we've seen some petitions talking about maybe building a European Union operating system, which would be Linux-based, maybe with all of this, we're gonna see the emergence of a strong Linux OS that is backed by governments and countries that are putting actual money into it to use it themselves. Maybe we're seeing the early beginnings of that kind of push, which would be very cool, but also, do we want a government-controlled operating system? I'm not entirely sure about that. Now, of course, 2024 was maybe not the year of the Linux desktop, but at least the year of Wayland. Plasma 6 emerged with the first really finalized Wayland session for KDE. 5.27 was already really solid in terms of Wayland. GNOME is so well finished on GNOME is pretty much done with Wayland as well. They're even pondering disabling access to the X11 session by default, although of course distros will be able to rectify that and put X11 back in the list of sessions that are available. Fedora is probably going to move to Wayland only, just like Red Hat is. Elementary OS has their own Wayland session. Linux Mint and Cinnamon have their experimental Wayland session. Budgie announced that their next release, 10.10, will be Wayland only. Cosmic will be Wayland only, Wine has a Wayland driver now, and virtually every piece of software is moving towards supporting Wayland, including Discord, even though their implementation is still shaky and they disabled it recently in their betas because they have other bugs that they need to deal with. And if you're wondering why Wayland would be a big thing for 2024, well, it's because we finally have a unified, secure, stable, modern platform to actually display windows, use multiple monitors, handle fractional scaling, HDR, per monitor refresh rates, all of those things that just did not work properly on X.org because it was never designed for that. So Wayland was a big thing in 2024, if only because the transition is finally complete. Only Mate really remains without a Wayland session, even XFCE has one now. So yeah, basically at the end of 2025, all these sessions are finalized and we can finally move on to more interesting things. Now, gaming is an area where not much progress was seen. The market share grew a bit, but we're still at around 2%, and it's still very low. We are still in a pretty bad situation when it comes to anti-cheat and game support. Most single-player games just run perfectly on Linux, sometimes with better performance than on Windows, but multiplayer stuff, depending on which anti-cheat solution they decided to go with, they're just a pain. They're probably, arguably, the worst situation we've seen on Linux gaming. I think things have gone downhill since the introduction of the Steam Deck and the first partnerships with Valve and Easy Anti-Cheat and BattleEye and things like that. I think we reached a new low in terms of how badly supported our platform is with these tools. Now, don't get me wrong, these tools have Linux support, but not a lot of developers enable that support because enabling Linux support means opening up cheating opportunities for people on Windows, or since the anti-cheat is less effective on Linux than on other platforms, cheaters just move to Linux so they can cheat more. None of the big games came over to Linux or support Linux, like Fortnite, Rainbow Six Siege, Apex Legends, Destiny 2, Rust, and others. And out of the website, are we anti-cheat yet? Only 1% of the games that use anti-cheat are supported officially, and 20% run without guarantee that it will work later. 59% are broken, and 4% even said that they just won't support us. So we have more developers, or at least more listed games, where their developers said that they don't want to support Linux, they actively don't support it. Now there are some interesting avenues for gaming in 2025. We've got the Lenovo Legion Go S, which will ship with SteamOS. They will have a SteamOS variant, which is nice. We know there won't be a Steam Deck 2 this year, but we might see some hardware from Valve, notably on the VR side of things. We're also gonna see a Steam Controller 2 coming up. We are going to see third-party handhelds shipping with SteamOS. It could increase SteamOS's market share or Linux market share, and the awareness that this platform is actually a really solid one that people like using, and so maybe developers will come to terms with that, or maybe solutions will be worked on so anti-cheat can work as well on Linux and SteamOS as it does on other operating systems. We've also seen some big stuff happening on open source drivers in 2024. They are now no longer an afterthought from manufacturers, and these drivers are everywhere. AMD drivers as a whole improved a lot with better handling of hybrid CPUs with efficiency cores and performance cores, better schedulers, and generally just lower energy consumption for better performance on all recent and modern AMD devices. No longer do you have the worst support on day one when a brand new AMD GPU releases. You now have really solid drivers. The only limiting factor is whether your distro has a recent enough Mesa version that includes those drivers or not. Intel has also shown way more dedication for graphics drivers, but also for their CPU drivers with the same kind of better hybrid support, but also the new Xe graphics driver and Xe2 support. Nvidia also moved to open source modules by default this year, even though most of the actual code is in the firmware, and that firmware is still very much proprietary. But the loader for the firmware is open source now for recent GPUs, and that's pretty cool. We also have new open source drivers for NVIDIA with NVK and Nuvo, and a new effort from Red Hat called Nova, which aims at replacing Nuvo. So in 2024, open source drivers made leaps and strides and progressed so much, at least for the important stuff like the CPU and the GPU. I'm not saying all drivers became better all of a sudden. We still don't have many fingerprint readers supported. We still have issues with external third-party peripherals of certain types. But generally, the base system is now extremely well optimized. We're seeing contributions from most major players. That's probably mostly because AI runs on Linux and no one wants to miss the AI train, but it still lifts all boats, so I'm not going to complain. Now, the area that really did not get any better in 2024 was packaging formats. It did not bring anything new, and it might actually have regressed. Arch received some funds from Valve and the STF to improve their package management tools and their infrastructure, which is nice, but everything else stagnated. Snaps are not as bad as they once were. They gained an experimental permission system, but they're still probably the slowest out of all packaging formats. They still clutter your mount points. Improving one snap doesn't always improve all snaps. You have to do changes and incremental improvements to every single snap out there to optimize them. They still rely on a proprietary store handled by Canonical. They're still not a very interesting format for most people. Flatpaks did not evolve all that much either. While adoption seems to grow with more official apps than ever before on FlatHub, it's still not the default method that most distros rely upon. It still uses a bit more space, it still cannot work for every type of application, and creating a Flatpak package still seems to be relatively difficult for developers. Distro packages did not fix any of their issues, namely security, because you install a package and all of its install scripts as root, so the package can do anything if there's a malicious script in there. Third-party maintainers are building these packages, meaning that you have to trust every single person who built every single package. They can also decide to be opinionated on which features they include or not. See KeyPass and Debian, where you lost some features because the maintainer thinks this shouldn't exist. Dependency problems still are everywhere. Package versioning hell is still there. In-place updates can still break your systems. Distro packages just did not get better. App images are still based on an insecure Fuse library, and they're still mostly an afterthought only used by third-party packagers and a few very niche Linux actors. So yeah, packaging formats were still a mess in 2024, they will still be a mess in 2025, because it's basically a cold war of packaging formats. Everyone is doing their stuff in their own corner. App developers really don't have a default choice. They are not building distro packages because no one wants to deal with one package for every single distro, for every single release of that distro that is still supported. No one's doing that. That's why distros package software themselves. It's not because it's a better way of doing things, it's because they have no choice if they want to have software. Flatpaks are still not perfect, snaps are still not that great, app images are just an afterthought, so developers still don't have an easy solution to make apps for Linux, and that's a problem because it means we don't get as many apps on Linux as we should get, or we get Electron stuff, which, yeah, nice. Anyway, 2024 was a very good year for Linux and open source. We secured a lot of funding for critical projects, thanks Germany, but they're not the only ones. We have the backing of Valve, a pretty big company. Even Nvidia is starting to see the light and is working on their Linux stuff, mostly because of AI, but they're still doing it. And generally, all of our desktops have gotten better. We have better subsystems, we have a better graphical stack with Wayland, we have better desktop environments as well, and better window managers and compositors if you use tiling window managers as well. They got much better in 2024. So generally our experience has never been as good, and there are signs that things will keep improving in 2025. With the Wayland transition finally behind us for most big-name desktops, so let's reconvene in early 2026 and take a look at whether things did get better in 2025 or if they ended up going way worse than what I thought they did. Anyway, what's not gonna get worse is the segue to our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. They make laptops and desktops that ship with Linux pre-installed. Why you would want that over buying any computer with Windows is that, well, you know that the hardware is just gonna work. With Linux, you can slap your distro and things just work perfectly. If they're not perfect, they actually have developed drivers and systems that you can install with various repos on your distro to make sure that things work. It's all open source, anyone can package that for any distro, which is really nice. They have a big range of computers that will fit any price point and every need, and Tuxedo Computers is the only thing that I use these days. All of my videos, my podcasts, my shows, my whatever you're watching or listening to that I create is done on one of their laptops. It's right there. It's a Tuxedo InfinityBook Pro 16. All my gaming needs are done on one of their desktops, the Tuxedo Cube. It's right there underneath the desk right here. So if you need a new computer, you want to support a company that actively works on Linux drivers and contributes back to Linux, well, click the link in the description below and check out Tuxedo. They are really, really solid. Anyway, this will conclude this video. Thank you all for watching or listening or whatever else. Don't hesitate to leave a comment, like, subscribe, whatever. You know how things work. It really, really helps the channel. 2024 was a really bad year. Let's hope 2025 is better, and it can be better if you click all of these buttons. In the meantime, thank you all for listening and watching. You can support the channel. There are links in the description as usual. And I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!